Shalom, shalom, family, and welcome to another Tanakh review. My name is Zurishaddai, one of the teachers of Congregation BINAH, CHOKMAH, located in the Red Hook section of Brooklyn, New York. Giving all honor, glory, and praise to the Most High, King of the universe, for allowing us to be here another day. Praying that the Creator of heaven and earth will continue to bless each and every one of you, continue to guide you, keep you, and protect you. Be with all of you who are sick. Maybe those of you who might be going through something are praying that the Most High God will continue to keep, bless, and protect you. So at this time, we're going to go over the portion of Tavo, do some highlights or highlight some points that might not have been highlighted. And for that, I'm going to pass it on to one of my mentors and one of my teachers, even Nasik Zurishaddai Ben Yehuda. How are you, Nasik?
Great, Baruch Hashem. I'm just saying, is that being live streamed? It's live stream now, or just being taped?
Yeah, it's live streaming. Yeah, but
okay.
but it's being saved for later. Don't worry. Go ahead.
Okay. All right. Great, Baruch Hashem. First of all, I give praise to the Covenantal universe, God, my forefathers, Abraham, Yitzchak, Yaakov. With respect to the platform I'm on, the D.C.B channel platform, spiritually Chief Prince Area up in Saska, to the host Chief Uzael, to the princes, chiefs, Kohanim, Rabbinate, Maureen, brothers and sisters and visitors to the channel. I greet you all in the tongue of forefathers, Shalom Aleichem, and the early Shabbat Shalom. And I'd like to say, Adonai, Septadi, Taku, Fiyagi, Tiyadeh, God, Lord, I'm my lips, my mouth to declare that praise. This time, I'll be covering Tavo, but I'd like to touch on a couple of things from Key to Say. And one is going, the Key to Say is, if it's translated most commonly when you go out. But it could be used more so in the case and scenario that is described in the beginning, is if you go out because someone was unnecessary, and then Key Tavo when you come in. And this is more accurate and concerning the people of Israel because of certain laws they had to deal with coming from that point in time. So as we finish, we're going through as we recognize and Key to Say they had basically 74 different laws that's enumerated within there. So you could just pick and choose the various portions of laws that one might want to discuss and elaborate on. And when we get to Key Tavo, you might have 6 or 7 laws that within the whole Sidra. And so some of them basically we touched on in part in the earlier portions of the book. But what's unique is that now we're going to be focusing on certain things that theoretically was taught, but it's going to take years to implement. And I'll get back to that in a moment. But I'd like to go back just a little bit and point out a couple of things from the previous Sidra. And but before I do that, just for people to read and review. When Key Tavo starts from the 26th chapter, first verse of Deuteronomy, and according to the Masoretic text, and it ends at the 29th chapter and the 8th verse. That's where it ends at. So basically 120, about 120 or 122 pasukim concerning this particular portion. So now I'm going to go back into last week's portion, dealing with the 25th chapter and 11th verse. And it deals with an immodest woman. And this is some things we kind of look at and consider that today it would be overlooked greatly. But why, if this is something that people might want to discuss further, why would Torah focus on this particular aspect? In the 11th verse, the 25th chapter of Deuteronomy, according to the Masoretic text, when men strive together, one with another, and the wife of the one draweth nigh to deliver her husband out of the hand of him that smiteth him, and putteth forth her hands, and taketh him by the secrets, then thou shalt cut off her hand, thy eye shall have no pity. Now that's it. She's going to save her husband. He got into a situation that's over his head, and she happened to be there. Now, you got to say, ask a bunch of questions. Was her husband being attacked, and she tried to, and he was trying to defend himself, or was the husband the aggressor and went in over his head? In any event, this fight that was going on at this time, in order for her, and she seemed to be trying to do a act, a rescue from something that they supposed to be bond together as one. And she grabs the opponent by his jewels. Now we know today everybody takes self-defense classes, everybody know that that's a vulnerable spot. And she actually grabs it with her hand. Now I don't focus on kicking them there. You wonder, she's standing there for a while. You say, well, there's no other objects you could use to try to get them off. There's nobody else around when this thing takes place. Could it take place only inside the house, in the yard? There's a lot of variables here. But the one thing, and they don't describe how much damage in the Torah that she actually does to the individual by grabbing them there. It could be very little damage, and it could be a permanent damage. But what is permanent, as I describe it here, if we go by a law, lex talionis, which is the law of the claw, a little, then her hand will be cut off for that rescue mission. And they say no one should pity her. Not even with a husband. How does she feel about that? So this is something to think about when we deal with judging different scenarios in the book. I just want to bring that out too. And the last thing it covers in that particular area is in the 17th verse of that same portion of the week before. Remember what Amalek did unto thee by the way as ye came forth out of Egypt. How he met thee by the way and smote the hindmost of thee, all that were enfeebled in thy rear, when thou wast faint and weary, and he feared not God. And you say, well, was Amalek obligated to worship God? Though he's a descendant of Esau, but did he consider himself obligated to worship God? But he was not in awe of God. Why? Because all the stuff that the Egyptians finally acknowledged concerning God at the time when he was in Egypt, Amalek himself go out his way to meet the children of Israel on their way when they took the scenic route, not a direct route, to come and smite them from the rear. So they had no regard for those that was even civilians. And it's a certain thing amongst organized crime and certain gangs. They say, well, you don't mess with little children. And one time, I don't know whether, that's up and down now. But you don't mess with children and civilians in scrimmages. You keep it with the warriors and scrimmages. So they had a certain type of code. It seemed like Amalek didn't have any code at all at the time. Therefore, it shall be, when the Lord thy God hath given thee rest from all thy enemies round about in the land which the Lord thy God giveth thee for an inheritance to possess it, that thou shalt blot out the remembrance of Amalek from under heaven, thou shalt not forget. Interesting. You blot something out, and it said to blot out the memory. So how do you remember and forget at the same time? That's something that always is puzzling. That you told to do two opposing things. Either I got to remember to do this, and then I got to forget about it, or I forget, or I don't forget the memory. So this is something that you might want to discuss. How do you do both? Remember and forget one at one in the same time. Now we're going to Tavo, and this is an interesting opening for the Tavo. And as we go into Tavo, it's opened up in the 26th chapter, the first verse. And it shall be, when thou art come in unto the land which the Lord thy God giveth thee for an inheritance, and dost possess it, and dwell therein, that thou should take the first of all thy fruit of the ground, which thou shalt bring in from the land that the Lord thy God giveth thee. Thou shalt put it in a basket, and shalt go unto the place which the Lord thy God shall choose to cause his name to dwell there. Now, several things I like to focus on before going to the third verse. One, we're talking about certain offerings and tithe. We talk about a sabbatical year. All that we learned 40 years ago. All that was never done throughout the 40-year period. And it says, when we come into the land and settle there. So that means that as we read in this particular portion, there's certain things we do first when we cross over the Jordan into the land and have a ceremony at two particular mountains. So this is not the first. So it means when you come into the land, then at what stage? It says that when you settle in. So that means that once you cross over the Jordan, once you get over there and you have a ceremony to perform, then you still cannot do this because you're not settled, because we have to have conflict, war, devastation going to take place. And it's going to take a while. So farming will not be an option at this point in time when we first cross over. So that's why it says once you settle. Now we know that the tribe of Gad, Reuben, and the half tribe of Manasseh took up their inheritance on the other side, which was formerly under in the territories of Sichon and Og. But now, are they exempt from bringing forth Mereshith from the first fruit? That's the term used in Hebrew, Mereshith, which is from the first fruit. Are they exempt because they want to have this territory on Transjordan? And then when would they get a chance to do it? Another interesting thing is that when we look at the time frame, it took basically 7 years to pretty much conquer the inhabitants. 7 years of basically fighting when you check later on throughout our history, and 14 years for everybody. 7 years to get their portion. So basically 14 years. So the tribe of Gad, Reuben, and part of Manasseh could not even focus on farming. And they wasn't focused on farming when they wanted that part. They say It's good for raising sheep flock, but they had a lot of cattle, a lot of flock. So now the Creator telling us that we should focus on farming. That's what I do Moshe. Moshe is letting you know that when we get into land, what we're supposed to do is actually focus on farming. That's the issue there. And you say, well, why that issue? Why that occupation? Now we know everything we need comes from the earth. So that's one area to consider as we go forward. And what's interesting is that for 14 years knowing this law, while in the land, we can't implement it until we begin to plant. So that means that don't mean the land don't have produce already in there, because we know when we enter the land after the circumcision, according to the book of Joshua, that after the Passover on the morrow, they ate the produce of the land. We got a date when manna ceased. So when they ate the produce of the land, that wasn't that part that they ate. They could not take types of the land at that particular time and talk about the first fruits of the land, because they had no input. So in order for it to be the first fruits, you got to have input within it. So it's a lot involved with this particular law. And when they talk about Hamakom, the place, we hear about that often throughout the 5 books. Hamakom, the place. And what's interesting, without naming the land and naming, say, the city of Sacrifice, or the land of Jerusalem, or the city of Jerusalem, or the land of Moriah, or the land of Shechem, like we read where some of the patriarchs might have been. We're talking about Hamakom, the place. We read an interesting thing when the term is used concerning our forefather Yaakov. When he was getting ready to leave Israel, and he went to sleep and had this dream, the only dream that was never interpreted in scripture, the Shalom, the ladder going up to heaven, with angels ascending and descending. When he woke up, he called that Hamakom, the place. And he recognized it as being something that's holy. So, and what's interesting is that we had the Mishkan in place, several different locations, and we never called that Hamakom, the place. That's interesting to think about. That we had the Mishkan within it, with the tabernacle and all the entourage and the clouds of glory. We never referred to that as Hamakom in that sense. And then when we look a little bit more, Moses' first encounter with the bush, it's God said, Hamakom, the place is holy. So it's holy there. So we hear this word and this term, Hamakom, often. And it became synonymous throughout later on, referring to Jerusalem without naming Jerusalem. But he had places, and other temporary places had certain type of sanctity to it. But when they say the place, it's focused on one place. And you always wonder, was Jacob's place the same as Moses' place? And we know it couldn't be. Geographically, they're not the same. So this term is very unique. And when we talk about the first fruits, from the first fruits, that means that basically, we it's only talking about the produce that the land of Israel is known for. Usually wheat, barley, pomegranates, figs, grapes, olives, and date tree, date fruit. Those 7 species are the ones that we bring up. That means if you had an apple tree, that's not one of the fruits that we're talking about. It wasn't Israel, the land of Israel was not known for that. And we talk about oranges. Uh, Israel wasn't known for the oranges. So today, Israel, they found different wheat kernels from way back that they analyzed to say it had more, I think, fiber, protein, whatever, than any of the wheat that we have today. And also, they have the actual dates. The dates that we have from Israel is not the same dates that that Israel was known for. When the Romans destroyed Israel, it destroyed all that. So they found um, some seeds and stuff from a date that they growing inside of a college for about 3 years, and they say, God willing, they should produce dates in 60 years within the 6-year period. So yeah, I may have some fruit coming from that particular plant. But what is expressed here is that when we talk about those produce in Israel that's mentioned, that was the best on the planet. There was no better produce on the planet. Even when they sent the so-called spies, bring some of the fruit of the land. So the one that was indigenous, the wheat that's in Israel, was better than any wheat that could grow anyplace else. Certain fruit thrives in certain areas. And why those particular species that's mentioned within the book is the ones that we take of the first fruits and offer up to the Creator. And why would they thrive better in the land of Israel? Simply because we read that God's eye is on that land from year to year. So it produces the best. And God only want the best. He only wants the best to be offered up and brought up. And we enjoy part of the best. Going further, what's interesting, I'm going to focus more on this particular portion. What's interesting is that when we talk about the actual uh, fruit, it says when we get it, how much do we get? And how will you focus on it? So they would tie a string around the first buds and say that's it, that's what these are the first fruit. But every crop we have, do we take all that comes and then say wait for it to grow back? So only from oral history and interpretation, they use the word tene. Tene, which is a Hebrew word for basket that's used here. And the tene itself has a gematria or a numeric value of 60. So they say you bring only 60% of the first fruit. You don't bring all the first fruit. That's why the word mereshit, from the first fruit. If it says mereshit, from the first fruit, that means that you're not taking all of the first fruit. You're only taking a portion of the first fruit. And then you come up with that amount for the portion. And as we go further in it, and it goes, and this is just part of the process. Then it says, and thou shalt go unto the place which the Lord thy God shall choose. In the third verse, and thou shalt come unto the priest that shall be in those days, and say unto him, I profess this day unto the Lord thy God that I am come unto the land which the Lord swore unto our fathers to give us. And the priest shall take the basket out of thy hand and set it down before the altar of the Lord thy God. Now, what's interesting here is that you standing before the priest. What makes him so special? And we have, you could say, well, what is more important to us, a nation, the government or the religious institution? The government protects it, secures it. Is the religious institution more important? Who, if you're talking about government, you're talking about the kingship. If you're talking about the priest, I know, religious institution, talking about a priest or rabbi, whatever the case is, in a religious institution. So now, which is what you rather have if you had to make a choice? Would you rather deal with the government and have that in place, or would you rather have the religious institution in place? Now, when the government changes, it can affect it can affect economy. It can affect safety. You can leave yourself vulnerable. With the but with the priest itself, everything is in the state the same in that area. And they say you stand before the priest, not before the king. So does not the king deserve a certain type of respect? But we know that it's basically we as Israel it's teaching you here that you don't depend on your military might. You don't depend on the government, but you depend on the creator and the system he set up, his law, statute, and judgment of living by. That's what we depend on. So it's not so much the government. Now, I'm not saying you don't need, and the government doesn't have its place. I want to make it perfectly clear. The government does have its place and necessary because we do have civil laws as well as religious laws involved. But if we adhere 100% to the law, statute, and judgments and teachings that Moses brought down to us, pretty much we actually need a lot of government. That's where it comes from. But we need a lot of armies. If there was no government and was no army, we'll find a way to try to work things out so we could survive amongst one another. We'll come up with some rules and regulations. So this is some of the things here that, and then and letting you know that you're professing, as though you stand before the priest, you're not professing to the priest, you're professing to the creator of heaven and earth. That's what's important. Most people in certain some religions, I'm making my confession to a priest. We standing there because we're told to stand there, and you're supposed to be working on my behalf, but I'm not giving the gratitude to you. I'm giving the gratitude to the Most High, to the Creator, because that is what He required at that time. And you just happen to be a guy that God said I should stand before. Because suppose you don't know much as a priest. Every priest is not on the same level for us knowledge. We know that when we talk about judges, Yiftach was a judge in a certain portion of Israel in the book, and so was Shemuel. Samuel was a judge. Yiftach was not on the same level as Samuel, though they both were judges of their time. And we know that you get the leadership of your times, you probably say, I'd rather get a blessing or stand and get a blessing from this holy man over here instead of the priest. We know, and part of our history, when in the book of Kings, that guys brought some loaves of the first fruit and gave it to the prophet Elisha. He said, you gave it to Elisha, the prophet. And they say Elisha was a priest, but he gave it to him. Um, he didn't think the priest was worthy. So these are some of the things to consider as we go forward, in the book, that it's not whether the priest is a brilliant individual, the greatest individual. It's by the actual status of his birth that he's a Kohen. So as that status, you performing God's will, and you're standing before him and before the altar, and you make this profession. Now, also, I like to bring and we don't stop there. And the priest shall take the basket out of his hand and set it down before the altar of the Lord, and thou shalt speak and say before the Lord thy God. All right, you're not only doing what he said thus far. A wandering Aramean was my father, and he went down into Egypt and sojourned there, few in number, and he became there a nation great, mighty, and populous. And the Egyptians dealt ill with us, and afflicted us, and laid upon us hard bondage. And we cried unto the Lord, the Lord, the God of our fathers, and the Lord heard our voice, and saw our affliction, and our toil, and our oppression. And the Lord brought us forth out of the land of Egypt, out of Egypt, with a mighty hand, and with an outstretched arm, and with great terribleness, and with signs, and with wonders. And he brought us into this place, and has given us this land, a land flowing with milk and honey. Now, behold, I have brought the first fruits of the land which the Lord thy God has given me. And thou shalt, so that's one portion. That's a long declaration that he got to profess. Now, you say, okay, one question. Why focus on Laban? Didn't Jacob have other problems in his life? Why focus on that? And then when we talk about Egypt, don't we talk about Egypt and rehearse that during the time of Passover and Kakamatso? Don't we talk about that? And even we reflect on it a little bit at the end of the year of Sukkot. So this is some of the things we must bring out. And also, when we talk about the first fruits that's brought up, when do you bring them? You bring them up in Shavuot, the feast of weeks. That's what they call it. That's also referred to as the time of the first fruits. And also, you could bring that up all the way up to the time of Sukkot, because certain fruits become first fruits later on in the season, in the year. But when we think about those first fruits, at the time, and it's a law that you only could do once, and it's a law that they never was able to do, even at the time of Moshe, that they only predicated when we get into the land, and it must be fruit from the land. We can't get fruit from Italy. We can't get fruit from Greece. We can't get fruit from Persia. It got to be those things that grow within the land of those species, 7 species that I enumerated earlier. And when we make this long testimony about an Aramean, we know that Jacob had an identity. He had a nationality. And also, it said, lost. Was he lost or was he destitute? The word of God, a very is an interesting word that's used there. And why will you only cite those two things, Egypt and uh, uh, the time when Jacob was with Laban, and not focus on other episodes in his life when he felt in danger, or other episodes in our life when we felt in danger? Why only those two major spots there? Even so much so that even in the Decalogue, the Sidra Hadipro, that we're referred to when God speaks to us, that I am the Lord that God which brought you out the land of Egypt, out of the house of bondage. Okay, but you did a lot more for us. But he focused on that. And then when we look further into the story, that Laban, he was God saved Jacob from Laban because Laban would have wiped Jacob out, and that means if Jacob would have been wiped out there, he had two major encounters where he could almost come to being wiped out, and that major encounter of being able to be wiped out, God intervened and saved them there. Then also in Egypt, destroy all the males and save the women. The Pharaoh in Egypt was going to wipe us out, because without the men, you will have no next generation of Israelites. So it focused on those two episodes in our history where we was in danger, and also we're in both places outside the land of Israel. Now we know God did a lot of wonders for us in the land and in the wilderness and stuff, but the most things that he did for us, the greatest things he done for us, was when Jacob went there and stayed 20 years, some say 22, because they're trying to make the number fit. And with Laban, his father-in-law, and when we spent 210 years in the land of Egypt. So those are great, great miracles and attitude of gratitude that we exhibit. It's all like a story I like to share at this point in time, when the a man and his wife been married for about 25 years, a long while, and the wife go to his marriage counselor and say, I have a problem with my husband. Our marriage, I have a serious problem with him. And the husband is sitting there with his wife in the marriage council to try to rectify the situation. So the marriage counselor said, "What is your problem, madam?" And she said, "Well, my husband don't ever tell me he loved me." And he asked the husband, "Sir, what you have to say about that?" He said, "I told her I love her 25 years ago. If that changed, I'll let her know." So one of the things when we think about that is that it's sometimes people, they talk and don't do no action, and sometimes they do the action and don't talk. Now, there's times when the talk is really worthless because you're not producing, but then there's times when you do action but you ain't expressing yourself. The thing is that it takes both here. What we learn from this particular law here is that not only we have an action that's being done, the action of bringing forth the first fruits, but we also acknowledging an attitude of gratitude for the Creator. And a lot of relationships fall in that area. It's not what you say, it's what you do. But they go hand in hand. You do things and you say things. You do something and you like to let another person know you appreciate that individual. And a lot of times we neglect that area in our lives. And hence, for whatever reason, it creates a problem. And so, with the very formula of bringing in, the first fruits at this time, that we are actually learning how to deal with one another and our significant other in life. And this is not the end here. So I'm gonna pick it up a little bit more, and and the 11th verse. And thou shalt rejoice in all the good which the Lord thy God hath given thee, and unto thy house, thou and the Levite and the stranger that is in the midst of thee. So joy, simcha. Simcha is a joy. Rejoice. Now, what is interesting about the term simcha, and I'm going to focus mostly on first fruits more so than anything else in this book. I'm going to touch on another little fact, that everybody like to talk about the more little portions. But when you talk about simcha itself, which is joy, the emotions we commanded by Moses is to love the Creator. We commanded emotion to love. On the Shalosh Regalim, they mention the word joy during the time of Shavuot and twice during the time of Sukkot. But out of the 613 laws, statutes, and judgment, it's not one law that's counted amongst that said you must have joy. There's not one law out of the 613. Can you imagine? We're commanded to have a love for the Creator. But out of 613 laws, statutes, and judgment to read about that, no matter who format they use, there's only going to be 3 discrepancies of the different formats that's used with accounting at 613. The command to have joy is not there, but yet we have a command to love. Now we got to think about that area there, and this pushes more of an attitude of gratitude. And when we think about the word simcha for joy in Hebrew, the word simcha could be actually broke down to 2 words. Sam moa. Put a mind there, put some thought there into what you do and consider. So that's, you could break that word down, that some people might use for the word simcha, a sam moa. Moak is a brain. So you put some thought to it. And when it goes on to say, let me see what verse I. So everybody get a chance to enjoy. The Levites, the stranger. They talk about the Levites, the stranger, the fatherless, and the widow, that they may eat and be satisfied. And now, okay. And then it goes on to say, in the 13th verse, then thou shalt say before the Lord thy God. We're not finished talking yet. All this is done when we bring up afterwards. After we make a profession, before we bring the fruits in the basket, and it must be in a basket. Now, how many baskets is it could be. Some people might, if it's 3 different items you got, 3 different baskets, but it's okay if it just be in one basket because it says in a basket. But it can't just be in a hand. It can't just be laying up in a wagon. So that means that you got to even bring the first fruits as a delivery package. You must bring the first fruits package. And it goes on to say, and be satisfied. That thou shalt say before the Lord thy God. All right, that's after you eat. Ain't that something? So we always talk about Birkat Hamazon, but usually the Birkat Hamazon that's basically is when you eat and been satisfied, you say a blessing. Nothing wrong with saying we know we got blessings from um the sages to say before we eat. The main one that's emphasized in the Tanakh is the blessing after the meal. So here we have another issue where it comes up and say, um, this is something you continue to say, and it's becoming part of the 13th verse. I put away the hollow things out of my house, and also had given them unto the Levite, and unto the stranger, and to the fatherless, and to the widow, according to all thy commandments which thou hast commanded me. I have not transgressed any of thy commandments, neither have I forgotten them. Now, the last part, if I if I did everything you required, then wouldn't you assume normally if I did everything that's required by law to the letter that I haven't forgotten it? So then why focus on talking about I haven't forgotten? If you did it already, it's done. So it should be obvious you haven't forgotten. But how many times, and I'll use myself as an example, saying prayers every single day, twice a day, from Zachary and Minka and Marty. And sometimes when you read, you might read the whole pages of prayers that you're reading and saying, and you may not really be conscious that you're actually saying them prayers to the Creator. You're reading it, you know you're standing there before the Creator, but you may not be focused with the Kawana, they say Kavana, but Kawana is the word, that you might not be focused on it in that degree. How many times people walk by you and say, good morning, I'm not giving a second thought. Oh, thanks, I'm not giving a second thought. They just said something, yes, excuse me, not even a second thought. You don't even exist. A lot of times they will say stuff and they may not be focused on it. And what the individual that's bringing this particular offering up at this particular time is saying, not only I'm keeping your commands, I'm focused on what I'm doing and who before I'm doing it with concerning. And so that's the difference, because how many times people walk by, ask for something, you don't even think about it. Don't pay any mind. Don't consider that I helped the soul. I did something. This is part of the command. You say, oh, let me get rid of it. Let me get rid of it. So this is why the last part, that I haven't forgotten, is important, that I'm concentrating. So a lot of times when we concentrate in our prayers, is when we're in a tight spot, as we say, between a rock and a hard place. Then we concentrating because we're focusing on our condition, but are we focusing on necessarily what we're saying and before who we're saying it to? So this thing is more, much more deeper than just keeping commands and I've forgotten. We read, you read in the book of Kings that it was a king that kept all the commandments of God, but it was not in his heart. And after a while, he messed up. But he kept all the commandments of God. And that's what it says in the book. But it was not in his heart. And that's also what it says in this book. So if we've forgotten the importance of doing these things, sometimes we do things by rote, as they say. And he not only said, I haven't forgotten them, I have not eaten thereof in my morning, neither have I put away they're being unclean. That means even I'm in a state of uncleanliness, I didn't violate by touching something that's holy, nor giving for the dead. I didn't take anything on behalf of a shrine like some cultures do for the dead. I have hearkened to the voice of the Lord my God. I have done according to all that thou hast commanded me. Look forth from thy holy habitation. The word they use there for the holy um, habitation in the 15th verse is an interesting word. Hashkipa. Hashkipa is spelled with a hey, sheen, a kuf, a fe, and a hey. All right, Hashkipa in the 15th verse. It literally means look down. Now that's kind of condescending. Normally, if you're doing something laudable, would you want somebody to look up to you? Or even if you don't want to look up to you, at least look at you. Why look down? That means examine me from head to toe. Because I'm saying this is what I did. And I don't want to be remiss. It's almost like when David, before he met King David, King David, great blessed memory, that in one of the Psalms, he said, judge me according to thine integrity. That's very important. Judge me according to thy integrity. So this is some of the things that we got consider. All right, but so for the dead, and then we didn't finish it in that same verse, 14. I have hearkened to the voice of the Lord my God, have done according to all that thou hast commanded me. Look forth from thy holy habitation, which is looking down, Hashkipa, from heaven, and bless thy people Israel and the land which thou hast given us, as thou hast sworn unto our fathers, a land flowing with milk and honey. Now, he's not just praying for himself. He's praying for the nation as a whole, because in the nation doing well, he gonna do well. We talk about a stranger. We talk about, all right, the stranger may not be too destitute, but he can enjoy. But the fatherless, somebody that has a lack in their life, or a widow, another one that has a lack in their life, especially at a time when you have more of a patriarchal system. So this is some of the things he said. I want everybody to be blessed. Some people want to make it and don't care about anybody else in life. But the the one that brings up from the first fruits, he wants everybody to make it like he made it. And that's one of the laudable things about this particular portion that I'm focused on. I'm going to skip just a little bit over. I just want to touch on a couple of things here because there's so much. Um, I want to touch on two more points briefly. But 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 when we do all this stuff, we become God's peculiar treasure. That's a covenant you look at. So we become his peculiar treasure at this time. In 27th chapter, first thing we do, say, and Moses and the elders of Israel commanded the people, saying, keep all the commandments which I command you this day. That means the elders that Moses is talking about now can't be the same elders 40 years ago, and as a majority that was actually his spirit was dropped upon. And I would venture to say, because if there's 70 elders, basically 72 in all, this is a round number, but because you got Eldad and Medad that didn't show up. and they were supposed to be the ones that were supposed to be recorded and called to come up, according to the book we read earlier in the book of I think the book of Shemot. Anyway, with the 70 elders that actually Moses had back then, is not the same 70 elders that he have now. Now you might have some Levites that's just as old as Moshe, but his spirit was dropped on those people of the other tribes, not so much Levi, because Levi had their own separate job to do. So that means the elders of Yehuda, the elders of Ephraim, they had the two oldest guys, Joshua and Caleb. That was actually the oldest guys. Everybody else, the oldest elder. And I'm talking about men. I'm not talking about women, because a lot of people like to say the book is more misogynistic and whatever the case is. The elders itself, imagine women having Moses' spirit dropped on. That would be like an odd thing to consider in the first place. But some people are still considered as misogynistic and in that area. When we think about those guys, we're talking about all the other tribes. Ephraim and Manasseh, which the tribe of Joseph, split in two. Those elders from the other tribes, other than Joshua and Caleb, Joshua being from Ephraim, Caleb being from Manasseh, those guys, the oldest could be is about 59. Because the march, the depth march, was from 20 and upward. And that's counting the rest of the children of Israel, not counting the tribe of Levi in that sense. So these are guys charge him now. This is a new group of people, and that's only not only being addressed. And the second verse says, and it shall be on the day when you pass over the Jordan unto the land which the Lord thy God giveth thee, that thou shalt set thee up great stones and plaster them with plaster, and thou shalt write upon them all the words of this law when thou art passed over, that thou mayest go into the land which the Lord thy God giveth thee, a land flowing with milk and honey. And as the Lord, the God of thy fathers, hath promised thee, and it shall be, when ye are passed over the Jordan, that ye shall set up these stones, which I commanded you this day in Mount Ebal, and thou shalt plaster them with plaster, and thou shalt, and there thou shalt build an altar unto the Lord thy God, an altar of stone. Thou shalt lift up no iron tool upon it. Thou shalt build the altar of the Lord thy God of unhewed stones, and thou shalt offer burnt offerings thereon unto the Lord thy God. And thou shalt sacrifice peace offerings, and shalt eat there, and thou shalt rejoice before the Lord thy God, and thou shalt write upon the stones all the words of this law very plainly. And I'm finishes out. And Moses and the priests and the Levites spoken to all Israel. Now keep silent and hear, O Israel. This day, all Israel, this day shalt thou art become a people unto the Lord thy God. Thou shalt therefore hearken to the voice of the Lord thy God, and do his commandments, his statutes, which I command thee this day. Now, one of the interesting things when we get to the ninth verse of that 27th chapter, but before I get into that, I'd like to speak on. So we start off about first fruits, bringing offering from the first fruits. We talk about who we stand before, the high priest, or priest, right? Not high priest, it's a priest, and we make this big declaration, acknowledging our history and acknowledging our presence, and also ending off with a blessing with people, with a good thing. So it's an attitude, a gratitude that's actually exercised here that's really unique in that sense. And um, um, but one of the interesting things that we learned from this here particular portion, that before we even talk about growing anything, we talk about a moral code of ethics when we enter the land. Yet it started off when we enter the land, this is what you must do from the first fruits. So when we talk about first in the particular portion of Tavo, when we come into the land of the first fruit, and how many times we come into the land? We only come into the land once, but we always got to we recite the same formula every year. That we're every time we come up and bring the first fruits, we recite this formula all the time about our forefather and about our Exodus, our time in Egypt. And yet, when we go into land, the first thing we do, we cross the Jordan, we stop. We got to come up these laws and stones and write down this law. Build an altar, and we're not even finished yet. Build an altar, so we have to have a code of law. Most people get to a place and come up with laws. We have a law before we get to the place. That's the difference between the nation of Israel and other nations. That we don't arrive and say, now, how are we going to live? We already decide how we're going to live by coming from the Creator. So the way we live is decided by the Creator. And when we arrive, we institute that first before we decide to live. And so the thing is that why now? You had the Mishkan, you had a tabernacle. Why at this point in time you have a second altar, that you build an altar of stone when you got a brazen altar that most sacrifices done on? And that brazen altar is not destroyed. It's still going to be part of the Mishkan when they shoot out and leave. So why that altar is not used and this altar is used? And then this time, it's going to be a one-time thing in this place, and we're going to write all the laws on the plaster. So that means that with your standard got to be acknowledged to anybody that come on that side. But what about the people that's on the opposite side? Do they adhere to the same laws? Do they have those same altars there? Why was it just only because the goal and the destination was to get to that side and not to stop like the 2.5 tribes? Well, basically, I'd say 2 tribes, Gad and Reuben did, not to stop, but to move on because Manasseh was on both sides of the Jordan. So this is some interesting things. And then I like to point out the word that the Levites use in the 9th verse of this particular chapter, and they use haskat, haskat, hey samet ka, and talk, ushmai. So silent and hear. That's it. You would think they was quiet all the time when they listening. You figure that no conversation is going on at this point in time. But when the Levites decide to say that and speak along with Moshe, then this means that you got to pay a little bit more closer attention, not discussing anything about the other side, because you could be in a meeting, no matter what, in every teaching, and every synagogue, no matter what time of day it is, you're going to have a sidebar conversation going on. So this is one of the things that's focused on here. And then it goes on to say, about the blessings and stuff like that. It mentions the blessings concerning the children of Israel. They don't. I mean, the 6 tribes can be for blessings. 6 tribes can be for actually cursing. And they tell you what tribe can be on what mountain for cursing, what mountain for blessing. Now, Mount Gerizim supposed to be with the mountain for the blessing, and the 6 tribes enumerated who's supposed to be on Mount Gerizim. And then the 6 tribes from Mount Ebal supposed to be for the curses. Mount Ebal is a better looking mountain, taller mountain, greater mountain, have a better viewpoint, but yet it's not because of the outward appearance that makes it. And then we only read about the curses. We don't read about the blessings here at this point in time. I want to fast forward just a little bit and talk about Deuteronomy 28 chapter, just a little bit, and then in a few moments just left. So I would like for everybody to try to go over these particular chapters. But in Deuteronomy, the 28th chapter, we're going to read about blessings and curses again. So now, when we hear about the curses, they're enumerated, and you say, well, why the blessings not mentioned here when they're supposed to be one mountain for blessings, one mountain for cursing? And a certain sects of what they call people that follow Judaism look at Mount Gerizim as a holy spot. It's because a blessing, you don't have to identify as much as a curse. A curse, you got to be able to recognize every little detail. Of course, you want to get rid of it. So that's one of the areas you got to bear in mind. And when it gets to the 20th chapter, you got 68 verses in this 28th chapter. And after 68 or 69 verses, 69, make the correction. 69 verses, this particular chapter. And when you have these 69 verses, you only get 14 verses of talking about blessing. Before you get, and from 15 on, you're talking about curses for disobedience. And the thing is, this here, the chapter most of us referred to in BINAH when I came up, is the mirror or the reflection of the so-called black man in America. And we kind of identify ourselves towards this particular portion here, because when we read it, we see this fits more of the so-called black man in America experience than any other people around the world. And a unique people that's not owned or recognized by anybody else. That's a people that's named and yet still considered outside, out the loop. When we look at this here particular portion, and it goes to all these curses, one of the things that you consider is that the curses that's talking about in Bechuthai in Leviticus around the 26th chapter, and compared to the curses that's enumerated in Deuteronomy the 28th, in Leviticus is far worse. Amped it up 7 times, then 7 more times on top of that. So it's 7 more times on top of that. So when you look at the curses there, and it's much harsher in Leviticus than right here in Deuteronomy. So we would say in Leviticus, it's more from a masculine, emotional type of thing, just using that for speaking in human terms, from a masculine viewpoint, where in Deuteronomy, it's more of a feminine viewpoint. And why I will focus on that is because in Deuteronomy, it's not that we're only going to go through some problems, but we also upsetting God because we caused the problems to come upon us. So it's the cause that we brought these problems upon us, not that God necessarily put the problems on us, but we bring them upon ourselves. And that's what. And when you look at very closely, and make the comparison between the 2 chapters, you'll find that God is affected more about these curses on us in Deuteronomy than it is in Leviticus when we look at that. And like a mother would feel more for a child getting beat down than a father would when you're getting certain punishment, because she carried them. So that's why they would say it's more. Most people view it from a mother's point of view, and that's, though we know God is above all that, but just using the language of men. And when we think about the different curses, we got to get down. I like to go down to the 47th verse in this particular portion, but there's so much going on. And it uses the term, it says, well, see, should I start here? All right, I'll start from the 43rd verse. The stranger has been in the midst of thee, shall mount up above thee higher and higher, and thou shalt come down lower and lower. Just started from the 43rd to 20th chapter. And I'm in the 44th verse. He shall lend to thee, and thou shalt not lend to him. He shall be the head, and thou shalt be the tail. And all these curses shall come upon thee, and shall pursue thee, and overtake thee, till thou be destroyed, because thou didst not hearken unto the voice of the Lord thy God, to keep his commandments and his statutes which I command thee. And they shall be upon thee for a sign, for a wonder, and upon thy seed forever. All right. Now, I'm just talking about a direct violation about the curses being upon concerning the stranger. All right. Now, let's go further in the 47th verse. Because now the stranger gets this here power over us because of certain things we ain't doing. All right. And that's the reason for giving for that. For all other curses, it says, because thou didst not serve the Lord thy God with joyfulness and with gladness of heart, by reason of the abundance of all things. Therefore shalt thou serve thy enemy, whom the Lord shall send against thee, in hunger, and in thirst, and in nakedness, and in a want of all things. And he shall put a yoke of iron upon thy necks, until he hath destroyed thee. Now, this is the reason all this comes. Not that we won't do God's law, but we do it with a will and a won't. It's not so much not trying to do law. We hated doing law. We didn't like doing law. And when you don't like something, you despise something, you don't find no love for doing it, no joy in doing it, then you're going to stop after a while and rebel. And this is given a reason here compared to the other one. The reason, in Bechotai. All right, so this Tokachot that he's talking about here is actually an admonishment of the reasons given simply because we didn't want to serve God in joy. We'll serve him, but I don't like what I'm doing. I'm just doing it because I have to do it. I'm only going to observe Shabbat because I have to, because they got some serious consequences, but I really don't want to do it. But as soon as I can get out, I'm gonna get out. I'm eating a certain way, a certain diet, because I have to do it. But the minute I could get away on my own, whatever the case, I'm gonna stop. I don't want to have to acknowledge and pray to God, because my life ain't what I want it to be. But right now, I'm doing this because there's too many people around. So it's not joy. I don't feel like making that pilgrimage times during Pesach, during Shavuot, during Sukkot. I don't want to do all that. And why should I bring up the first fruits of my land and give it to somebody else when I work for it? I don't like that. I'm totally against this guy or these people feeding off my hard labor. So without joy, and they say you're supposed to have joy in assisting. A lot of times, a parent, a real parent, have a lot of joy when the child make accomplishment. When they graduate, they be happy, and yet the child did the work, but they be happy for the child's success. And so we didn't have no joy in that area there. All right, I'm just going to skip through the shit. That's a little bit of time because, like I said, it's a long chapter. I want to go into the 29th chapter of this here particular portion and uh, speak a little bit on that. And it says, the 29th chapter, first verse. And Moses called the men of Israel and said unto them, Ye have seen all that the Lord did before your eyes in the land of Egypt, unto Pharaoh, and unto all the servants, and unto all his land, the great trials which thy eyes saw, the signs, and those great wonders. But the Lord hath not given you a heart to know, and eyes to see, and ears to hear unto this day. In other words, one, you talk to some people that actually was born in Egypt, the elders, the women, but then you got a generation of people that never was born in Egypt, never recognized all that. So now when we think about that, and it said it took 40 years for them to understand and realize what Moses told them all that time and what God had in mind for them to do, and that God had their good in mind. 40 years to analyze and accept it and realize and understand it completely. I don't, as I said when I was visiting Shema, that I don't know no course in history or any course in college, no matter what college you go to, where it takes 40 years to learn anything. And no curriculum, whatever field or discipline you want to pursue. I don't know where it takes 40 years to do that. And you're talking about just basic, if you enumerate 613 laws, statutes, and judgment, and you say it takes 40 years to understand that, when it's basically 365 days to a solar year, not counting the different, fractions of that they deal with. And you mean to tell me that it took 40 years for us to understand what Moses was talking from day one? And it says, God gave you the heart to really see deep into, beyond saying the thou shalls and thou shall nots. That is really for benefit and the health of society. And so this is something that I'm going to pretty much finish out with this particular chapter. And it says, And I led you 40 years in the wilderness. Your clothes are not waxing old upon you, and thy shoes are not waxing old upon thy foot. Ye have not eaten bread, neither have ye drunk wine or strong drink, that ye might know that I am the Lord your God. And when ye came unto this place, Sihon, the king of Heshbon, and Og, the king of Bashan, came out against us unto battle, and we smote them. And we took their land and gave it for an inheritance unto the Reubenites, and unto the Gadites, and to the half tribe of Manasseh. Observe therefore the words of this covenant, and do them, that ye may make all that ye do to prosper. So that's where we can pretty much end there. But one of the things I like to focus on when we're talking about that area there is that Moses saying, all that time, you're just learning, and it was all for your good. And now, if you really want to prosper and move ahead, and they talk about prosperity first, because you can't bring first fruits without a land being fruitful. So this is some of the things we learned there. So when we talk about the curses, and I'm just going to reflect back to the curses, the difference between Leviticus and Deuteronomy is that when we say in Leviticus, God ends it off by telling us that He's going to remember the covenant with our ancestors. At the end, towards the end of Deuteronomy, when we talk about the curses, one of the things that they focus on is that you would try to sell yourself and no man would buy you. So now, if you're trying to sell yourself and no man would buy you, that's a good thing. Because now, when we went to the period of integration, it's about segregation and not integration. Holiness means to separate from certain things. So when we're talking about Kadosh, we're talking about being separate, set apart. Bilam realized that, we're not going to be reckoned amongst the nations. We're people that dwell alone. People don't mind working you for free, but they're not going to hire you for anything. And if you're fortunate enough, God make a smile upon you, get a bit of a job, you're there only from the grace of the Creator. And that means that in captivity, in the land of your diaspora, wherever you're at, you're not supposed to be 100% successful. And that's the great thing that keeps you unique and separate from thinking you're somebody else. You're always going to realize that you are a people that don't belong and want to leave this exile. So when people talk about, well, why we don't have this and why we don't have that, why we have this here struggle when other societies and other people is doing this and doing that, it's because we were brought here. Do anybody prosper in jail want to leave jail? Anybody go to prison that doing so well in prison that say, I don't want to hit the streets? Now, you have some people that might say, I'm going to turn down my parole simply because it's wintertime. I'm getting meals. I got a place to stay warm. I don't have to worry about my clothes. I don't have to worry about fashion statements. I'd rather stay here and become acclimated to that. But we're not a homeborn slave. So why should we be spoiled? And so therefore, when we think about we try to sell ourselves and nobody want to buy us, that means that's the way God protecting us to be individuals, unique. Segula means peculiar. Your only value. It don't mean that you talk about gold and diamonds or gold and silver, stuff like that, and brass or diamonds and cobblestones and stuff. What we're talking about is that Segula means that our real value is only to the Creator and not to anybody else. And the Creator wants us. So I hope what I shared with you was helpful. And any mistakes been my own, I'd say Shalom Aleichem and Shabbat Shalom.
Hallelujah. Torah about Nasik. Thank you all for tuning in. We pray that the Most High God continue to bless each and every one of you. May the Most High God continue to bless all of you who diligently listen to the channel and to this show.